Most people think Cape Cod ends at Provincetown, but there was a time when other settlements existed out there.
There were a number of fishing encampments on both the back shore, which is the Atlantic-facing shore, and also the Herring Cove area, even closer to Wood End. People clearly were wanting more direct access in the winter to cod fishing.
So what they did on the back side, they used to cart the fish over land because it's so dangerous. Don't underestimate how dangerous it is to come around here and go in. Extremely dangerous. Race Run is this, right here, okay? And it used to go way back. It was much bigger back then. And they put 2 bridges over Race Run so that they could, because it stretched so far, they would have to come this way and then go over here to come up. So they built a bridge to just go right over it.
Getting around the point was hard in the winter, so the settlement called Helltown was formed between Wood End and Race Point. Legends grew up around Helltown. People said that wreckers lived there, men who put out false lights to lure a vessel to destruction. But as a matter of fact, it was a settlement of huts where the fishermen slept in bunks so that they could, in winter, avoid the long journey around Race Point.
This was very much part and parcel of Provincetown fishing history for the Yankees, who were poor early on, early 1800s, they were still poor, and the Portuguese, and I don't know of many Irish fishermen who were out there. It's entirely possible. So Helltown was the biggest encampment located at Herring Cove that was directly focused on cod fishing in the winter.
They worked hard, they played hard.
Yeah.
They worked hard, they played hard. That was their life. There was no church to redeem them.
This legendary Provincetown fishing settlement is stereotypically described by chroniclers of Provincetown as, quote, a rendezvous for those with unlicensed appetites.
It earned the moniker Helltown because it didn't have a parish. Truro went to the point of demanding to be separated from Provincetown.
I believe they had to show that they had a preacher in order for the state to recognize Provincetown.
They thought they were ungodly people.
Yeah.
But the thing is, back then when that was going on, Provincetown had been abandoned and rehabited. It was very hard to make a living here. Now, Helltown was not the first. Helltown was the last settlement to go up, which I always found funny that Helltown, because of the name, everybody focuses on it.
They were walking out there or, scrapping it out by living out there at Helltown. And these were shanties. Long Point had houses. They had parlors. They had a schoolhouse. They had windmills. They had salt works. It was a year-round working community. And Helltown was basically fishing huts with fishing gear and guys sleeping around their fishing gear. So it's really different styles of living.
Thomas R. Doyle writes about Helltown. He says, the history of Helltown lies somewhere between the realm of fact and fiction.
I would say Helltown was an established seasonal fishing encampment, and it was known in the newspapers pretty far and wide. It's just been picked up. So Helltown was known. It was known in the press. It was known for the reports on Helltown, how much fishing, how well the fishing was going, how many thousands of pounds of fish they brought in, and it was a huge number. But it wasn't known in the sense of a census taker going out there doing a year-round census. but it was not the only encampment. And it was the most well-known. It got the name for Helltown, some people say because of the exposure it was hell living out there. Other people said because of the hike out there was a hell of a hike. Other people said because of the lack of women, it was kind of hellacious living. Other people said because of all the helling that went on, because of the drinking and perhaps fighting and other aspects of living there. So Helltown became notorious.
Many thought all the outcasts were out there, runaways, rum runners, people that couldn't live in town. I know that where Helltown is was also where a lot of men, before the gasoline boats, they could ship out faster. Same thing with Long Point. They could get to sea faster. They could get out on the bank faster if they lived at Helltown.
The original Helltowners were using hand lines. They were fishing right off the edge of the boat, but then trawl fishing comes into service. They earned perhaps $15 a week, but they had to pay for the barrel. Helltowners had to pay for the lid, the ice. According to Nancy Meads, this was later, these would be people fishing in the Helltown area. They were taking it in by cart, bringing it down to the water, washing it, transferring it to dories. So it's very possible it was being brought to one of the fish processing plants just to be washed, put on ice, have a lid go on and be well sealed, and then be delivered right to the train. So Helltown had anywhere from maybe 35 to 50 dories, 100 men, and then some women living out there. But there's at least one article that talks about something close to 100 dories out there. We're talking Race Point area because the fishing was so good. And people are drinking out here, and it's out in Helltown. And well, people are drinking aplenty in Provincetown too, but in Helltown they're beyond the temperance committee and the law. So it would be a lot easier to be like tippling whiskey out there than it would be in Provincetown, where you could have like the police knocking at your door. Helltown, the fishing shacks were small. They could be maybe 8 by 12. They might have been slightly larger. They were first built for fishing gear. They would typically have a stovepipe, a rusted stovepipe, and they were sleeping early on, and maybe all the way through, on ropes, on waifs, which is like stuff that had floated in from the sea. So they were wreckers in the sense that these cottages were they were using whatever secondhand lumber they could find out there.
Different mindset back then. We live in a disposable world. Back then, you have to remember, every piece of wood was reused because we were deforested by 1800. They cut everything down to burn, to make things, whatever they needed, you know? And so there was no wood. And it wasn't, there were rich people, not a lot of them.
When I came in 1946, I walked out to Helltown, and you could still see the stumps of the shacks sticking out of the water, low water. Yeah, it was a whole community there.
A longtime Provincetown resident, Ross Moffat, linked remains found between Race Point and Race Run with Helltown.
So Helltown was around 1880. So that means in 1873, the railroad was in. It was a place that was ruled by few laws. It was up to the men to police themselves. And they didn't do a very good job of it.
I think they were certainly risk takers. It was dangerous. Fishing in the winter could be treacherous because they were going out by the race where there were cross currents. Weather reporting was totally different then. Weather reporting was basically the fishermen, I think, looking at the sky and having a sense of what the weather was. There were times when dories were caught out and in certain cases didn't make it back. Nerves of steel, yeah, to be able to go out there. Also, I mean, there were times, I'm sure it was a beautiful day. They had to sail in a jib. You could sail out in a nice fresh breeze. But there were times when the waves were picking up, when it was a very crowded day out there by Race Point. And it was a whole range. I mean, it wasn't just Race Point. Wherever the fishing was good, but it was Cape Cod Bay and then into the Atlantic.
Despite Helltown's colorful reputation, very little in the way of verifiable historic fact exists for this transitory fishing village. This community, if in fact it existed, was set apart from Plymouth Colony not only by geographic distance, but by cultural differences as well. The scandalous reputation of Helltown probably dates back to these early Cape Cod fishermen who, according to Hopkins, appear to have been a jovial, enterprising set who paid little heed to the strict puritanical ways of old Plymouth, and consequently were frequently before the court upon complaints charging them with carousing at the Cape.
Life here was a lot closer to the bone. Before 1873, before the railroad, there was a lot less meat, even chicken and pork and beef. People actually ate seagulls back then. They would capture the gull and feed it grain for a while, and fish and shellfish and so forth. So the railroad really transformed lives here in ways that we can only imagine. It must have been the biggest change. And there was also a whale oil refinery there. There was all sorts of business there. So I'm not sure even what we think of as Helltown was quite as hellish as it was made out to be. But still, it was a maritime culture. And it still is in some shreds of its existence. I still know old fishermen that go down to the wharf every day they go down to the wharf and look around just to see what's going on. And that's what they always did every day, whether you were going out or not. You go down, who went out, what'd they catch, what was it like?
It was away from town. Town was a dry town, so there was drinking out in Helltown. It's hard to tell from the articles, but purported fights out there where women were out there with the men. Bait knives would come out. Outsiders were not really desired. They put up with the teamsters, the guys driving the carts, the horse and carts, because they had to be out there. Understanding the role of women has been difficult to tease out because many of the articles mention women there, or some people say there were no women there. Other people say there were camp followers. Well, Grace Gouveia indicates there were camp followers, indicating kind of a naughty type image. Well, the wives were not living out there. I don't get the sense that that was happening, but it's very possible that there were women walking out there, maybe not in the very early morning when the men went off fishing, but in time to help them bring in the fish. Then I just found this very small paragraph written by a painter, and she was out there with her partner, who I think was her life partner, painting and talking about the women who they observed helping the men carry the fish into huts. So this was probably in the 1906, 1907. Her book is published 1908. So one big question is the role of women there. Many of them had houses in Provincetown. Those are the ones, many of the Helltown fishermen were originally walking back and forth to their houses. So they lived in town. But by the time they are living out there through the winter, then their wives or sons are bringing them food, bringing them lunch. So there's still communication a lot back and forth because it's walkable. However, with all of the names that I found that I couldn't place, I'm wondering if those guys were coming out to Helltown for the winter because of good fishing. These were, a lot of them were family men, or maybe the sons of families, but they were recent immigrants, so they were really working to make it through the winter. So it wasn't like the smuggler, mooncusser era of the 1700s, or early 1700s, or even 1600s, when Provincetown was a free-for-all. Before it became established as a town.
So it was basically a fishing and hunting reserve, for better words, you know. People came, they fished, they hunted. I would say like 3/4 of the way through the 1700s that it was permanently settled for once, for good and for all.
The best article I have is of someone who clearly lived in Helltown, and he talks about a much calmer type environment where they're drinking some whiskey, singing some songs, playing the guitar, fishing, mending their fishing gear. So the articles that are published 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, one has to start asking now, are they getting into the realm of people passing a tale that gets exaggerated with each telling? So when do they totally abandon it for, like, in terms of letting the shacks totally disintegrate? That's a good question. So I think the ending is not hard and fast, but there is an ending in terms of living out there. So I think the poor guys stayed out there, probably even living out there after the slightly wealthier ones had engines. So you have talk about Helltown up until early even 1915, there's a girl who gets lost, and they say she slept out at Helltown. Now, they didn't say she slept out in a hut. They said, I think she slept out on the beach. Maybe it was warm. So you have people, many, many people who have come to the end of the Cape, and I think including the Portuguese community, and that doesn't want to be part of the Puritan, uptight Puritan ethos of Boston.
I think Helltown is a big part of our culture. I think that it's a throwback to the way it was in the 1700s, of the way the men lived. I'm sure Helltown was the last settlement to spring up on the backside. And we also have Race Point, we had Peaked Hill Bars, and we had Long Point. And I'm thinking there were settlements even before that, because those settlements popped up around 1800. I think men have been living on the backside for hundreds of years.